Okay, beautiful. Yeah. You get it now. You get it. Okay. Welcome to lecture 3. So if you remember, what we did last time was we practiced a lot and we talked a lot and actually defined explicitly the grammar for TFL. What we haven't done is figured out when TFL sentences are true and false. And that's what we're going to do today. Right? So in particular, what we're going to start off with is a review about the very idea of truth functionality. So this is the underpinning concept behind our language, why the language is set up the way that it is, and why it works the way that it does. And this concept is going to be why we can do the kind of evaluation mechanism that we're going to develop. So after we talk through that, we'll pivot to talking about truth tables. So this is the machinery. Truth tables are actually very straightforward. They are literally tables of truth values. So the way we're going to get at that is each connective has a characteristic table. That is, it has a characteristic kind of story about what it does with inputs and what truth value it outputs. So we're going to talk through each one of those, each characteristic table. And then once we've got all of those in our heads, we'll talk about how to build complete tables, which is basically going to be stitching these little ones together. After we've kind of talked through the mechanism, made sure we understand how the tables go, we're going to use the tables to give us a bunch of semantic properties. So remember from lecture 1, we had notions like necessary truth, necessary falsehood, contingency. We're going to define concepts that parallel those. But importantly, instead of being defined in some kind of nebulous notion of possibility or anything like this, we'll have a very specific way to define them. And it will be in terms of the things our tables are made out of. And the big payoff, the big payoff, is that we're going to have a bit of kit, a bit of machinery, that actually will let us determine whether arguments are valid or invalid. We can feed it into the machine, and the machine will output whether it's valid or invalid. So that's the kind of plan. If we have enough time, we'll talk about how we can sort of do some shortcuts, do some partial tables. I fully expect we won't have time to do this. That's no problem. I'll upload a little video talking through it. The big points are going to be these first 3. So that's the plan. You know the drill at this point. Obviously, if you have questions along the way, just stop, ask, we're good. Okay, so truth functionality and TFL. So we know from last week that any non-atomic sentence of TFL is going to be composed of atomic sentences linked up by the sentential connectives, the 5, right? Negation, conjunction, disjunction, conditional, material, or the biconditional. Now the connectives, well, we can talk about these for a second. And we can say that a connective is truth functional if and only if the truth value of a sentence featuring that connective as its main operator is determined by the truth values of the constitutive sentences. That's a really long mouthful of a definition, but the basic idea is fairly clear. A connective's truth functional if and only if its truth value is a function of the truth values of its parts. We fix the truth values of the parts, and that will determine the truth value of the connective. Every connective of TFL, the 5 that we defined, are truth functional. That is, to determine the truth value of a TFL sentence, we're just going to need to know the truth value of the parts, and then how those truth values are distributed will tell us what's going on at the higher levels. In fact, it's even stronger than that. It's not just that every connective of TFL is truth functional. That's all they are. They are just truth functions. They're nothing more than maps between input truth values to output truth values. And in fact, just between friends, this whole damn language is only about that. This is why we've been talking about moving into TFL as symbolization rather than anything like translation. When we symbolize something into TFL, all we care about is its contribution to the truth value of what's going on higher up. And you can actually see this when you think about the way we've been approaching some of the symbolization tasks. There are lots of nuances in natural language, things like implicature, tone, emphasis. None of these are going to be captured or reappear in TFL. Hell, tense. TFL doesn't even have tense, right? But that's fine. That's just not relevant to what TFL is designed to do. TFL is designed entirely and completely to track this notion of truth functionality. So we can give you an example. And actually, we kind of hinted, I think we even talked about this in the tutorial last week. Right? Take this sentence, Brittany had a baby and got married. Right? In English, there's a suggestion of order. And you can hear it. Just compare Brittany had a baby and got married with Brittany got married and had a baby. Right? One of them suggests that there was a baby and then a shotgun wedding. The other was the kind of process that most cis-het couples go through. Not everybody, thankfully. But of course, if we symbolize this into TFL, well, we can do it as B conjunction M, or we can do it as M conjunction B. We don't have anything like order. Because in TFL, we don't care. All we care about is the fact that this requires two things in order to be true. We don't care the order that they occur in. So again, to stress, this is why moving into TFL is not a translation. A good translation, arguably, should capture that implication of order. If it didn't do that, it would be a bad translation. And so moving into TFL is a bad translation. That's why it's not a translation. It's a symbolization. It's trying to capture the logical structure, the truth functional structure of this sentence. And the truth functional structure is it's only true if both sides are true. Yeah.
I still don't really understand the definition of true function.
Good. So it'll kind of come through as we talk about things a little bit further, but the basic thought is a connective is going to be truth functional if the value it has is determined by how we toggle its parts. That is, the truth value of the complex sentence is determined entirely by the truth value of its constituent parts. So take this, right? This is not truth functional. The and here is not truth functional because there's a suggestion of order. So it would be, in some sense, kind of false if you said this, but actually what happened was she got married first.
So basically, if you can put it in a sentence of TFL and it does not have any outside implications, it is truth functional.
Better. Truth functionality is always a property of a connective. So the conjunction, the thing that looks like the A without the bar, it is truth functional. Right? We don't really talk about the language or a sentence being truth functional, the connective. So that is truth functional, but that isn't. It has more to it. It'll kind of come through as we talk about the machinery a little bit, but it's good. It's good wording. Okay. Everybody with me so far? So we can say this. When we treat a TFL sentence as symbolizing an English sentence, what we're doing is we're stipulating the TFL sentence is going to take the same truth value as the relevant English sentence. And that is the only bit we care about. We don't care about what the English sentence means, who it refers to, what tone it was delivered in, none of that. We just care if the English is true, so is the TFL. If the TFL is true, so is the English. If the English is false, so is the TFL, vice versa. Just capturing the relevant truth values. Yes?
What does stipulating mean?
Stipulating means we're just making it the case by saying, right? So stipulating is where you literally just say, okay, this is the way it's going to be. Cool. Okay. Good so far? So again, this is kind of setting the stage. Now, any non-atomic TFL sentence is composed of atomic sentences linked up by sentential connectives. This is the point we made at the beginning. And in TFL, the truth value of a complex sentence is entirely determined by the truth values of the atomic sentences that make it up. This follows from the fact that all of the connectives are truth functional. Now, the trick is going to be exactly how this determination goes. And this is really what we're going to spend most of our time today talking about. Each connective is going to have a very specific mapping. It's going to take in certain kinds of inputs and then deliver certain kinds of outputs. You can think of them a little bit like switches. They're going to have certain kinds of combinations of power flowing in, and then it will tell you whether the power is going out or it's not. So let's talk about the characteristic truth tables for our connectives. Our truth functional connectives. Now these are characteristic because what they're literally going to be is, hey, if you get this input, here's the output. We don't care how the input's coming. We don't care what sentence of English the TFL sentence is mapped to. We just wonder, is it on? Is it off? So we can depict this method of determination via a truth table. A truth table is literally, as the name suggests, a table of truths. Hey, you didn't know you're going to learn Excel in this class? You're not, actually. But basically what we're going to do is something very similar to Excel. We're going to build, literally, collections of truth values. And we'll abbreviate the truth values in the relevant kind of way. True will be abbreviated as T, false as F. Note, the instances of T and F in our table will not be atomic sentences. They are shorthand ways to say true or false. This is why if you find it easier, I'm happy if you want to write 1 and 0 for true and false. Some people put plus and minus. I don't care. Right? All that matters is that we have a label for when it's true and a label for when it's off. Okay, so here's the core idea. This is what our tables are going to be built of. Our tables are built of what we'll call valuations. An evaluation, and this is going to be the core idea behind our machinery. A valuation is an assignment of truth values to particular atomic sentences. So our table is going to consist of rows and columns. Rows go across. Right? Rows go across. The way to remember, you row across the ocean. Rows go across. Each row represents a possible valuation. That is a possible assignment of truth values to atoms. We're going to say, okay, A is true, B is false, C is true. There's one valuation. A different valuation. Let's make them all false. Each row is one valuation. We're going to stack them. Right? And as we stack them, we're going to get a complete table. A complete table represents all possible valuations, or all possible relevant valuations. So if rows represent a single valuation, columns represent us looking across the whole of possibility space. And these tables are going to be the way that we calculate the values, the truth values of complex sentences. Easier as we kind of go through examples, but this is going to be the basic idea. The core notion is evaluation, a row of the table. Okay. So here's our first characteristic truth table. Negation, right? Negation is a flipper. Whatever truth value you feed in, it outputs the opposite. So if the sentence you stuck the negation on is true, then the negation is false. Similarly, if the sentence you stuck the negation on is false, then the negation is true. Input is true, output's false. Input false, output true. Negation is, of course, the only one of our connectives that only takes one input, so it has by far the simplest table. Because there's only really two options. The input's true or the output's false. That's it. The rest of them, of course, we're going to have to consider more possibilities. Because the rest always require two sentences as inputs. So there's negation. Now let's talk about conjunction. Conjunction. We have A conjunction B. There's two inputs, right? Sentence A and sentence B. Well, there's different truth values that these sentences could have. So our conjunction is true if both inputs are true. Every other time, it is false. Conjunction is hard to please. It is only happy if both inputs are happy. Both inputs have to be on for conjunction to be on. If even one lets it down, it is sad. Noticeably, conjunction is also symmetric. That is, it doesn't matter if you have A conjunction B or B conjunction A. It's the same sentence from TFL's perspective. Okay. Cool. So negation was the flipper. Conjunction requires both to be true. Okay. Our next one, disjunction, or. Disjunction, easy to please. Disjunction's true if even one of the inputs is true. Right? If A and B are both true, then A or B is true. If A is true and B is false, then the or is true. If A is false and B is true, the or is true. The only time it's sad, the only time a disjunction is false, is if both inputs are false. And much like conjunction, disjunction is symmetric. A disjunction B is the same as B disjunction A. Okay, good so far. Questions about this kind of general idea, right? So I'm presenting them to you in this order, but when we're going to build bigger tables, all we care about is what the input values tell us. We don't really care where they're coming from. Because note, in each one of these, I've written a sentence in my sexy swatch font. So the inputs could be atoms, or they could be themselves complex sentences. Yes?
Do I need to or do we need to define the true functionality of a connective in relation to an English sentence?
No. So truth functionality purely just tells us about how the output sentence gets its truth value. We don't care what these TFL sentences are, in this case, and we definitely don't care what English sentences we're mapping them to. At this point, we're only thinking about evaluating TFL sentences. Now, the background thought, and the reason we want to do this, is we're going to take English, map it into TFL, symbolize the English into particular TFL sentences, and then feed this into our machinery. And our machinery is going to tell us things like, oh, here's the circumstance where you can make the premises all true and the conclusion false. That's going to be what the machinery does. But it only operates on TFL sentences. It doesn't care about this extra bit, the symbolization key thing. That's a way for us to start getting into the TFL. This is a way to say when TFL sentences are true or false. That's the key idea.
Then what defines true functionality?
Good. These two. Right? Again, the concept of truth functionality is that these connectives, the truth value of any sentence featuring them, is determined entirely by the truth value of these constituent parts.
So the table itself
It's literally
true
giving you,
functionality.
yeah, it's showing you how this is truth functional. The table is literally a map to tell you, here is the truth function that is conjunction.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Right? Just like this one was telling you, here is the function that is negation, and here is the function that is disjunction.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. Okay.
Are people familiar? Did we talk? Maybe I even talked about this on Friday. Do people know the song Conjunction Junction? Okay, well, next time you have some time, look it up on YouTube. It'll get stuck in your head. Right? It's okay. Each one of these is basically literally an input-output function. And that's what the table is giving you. That is exactly what the table is stating. Okay. 3 out of 5. 3 out of 5. I'm going to go out of order, and I'm going to talk about the biconditional because, again, between friends, the conditional is weird.
Yeah.
So, yes, let's talk about the biconditional. The biconditional is this truth function. The key thing behind it is that the biconditional is true if and only if both sides have the same truth value. If the two inputs are both true, the biconditional is true. If the two inputs are both false, the biconditional is true. The only time it is false is if they differ. So the biconditional is very similar to conjunction. The only difference is that last one. Right? The biconditional is true if both inputs are false. The conjunction is false. And much like conjunction and disjunction, it is symmetric. We don't care about the order. You can play swapsies. It's fine. Okay. Now the last one is the conditional. And the conditional has a very strange truth function. We'll go through it line by line. So for the conditional, the first one, if the antecedent is true and the consequent is true, the conditional is true. The second one, if the antecedent is true and the consequent is false, the conditional is false. The third one, if the antecedent is false and consequent true, conditional is true. And finally, if antecedent and consequent are both false, conditional is true. Now, again, this is strange. Not gonna lie. It is weird. And actually, if we think about it, we can think about two particularly strange things. So let me highlight the two particularly strange things. The first strange thing, the so-called first paradox of material implication, is that whenever the antecedent's false, the conditional is true. So here's a true conditional. If there are exactly 50 people in this room, then there are exactly 5,000 people in this room. If we map this onto TFL, this conditional is true because there ain't 50 people in here. That's fucking weird. That's weird. That's very weird. So whenever antecedent is false, conditional is true. The other weird thing is that whenever the consequent is true, Doesn't matter what the antecedent says, the conditional is true. So here's a true conditional. If Nathan is a professional football player, then Tilburg is in the Netherlands. That is a true conditional, despite the fact that I am most definitely not a professional footballer. Right? No, I know, it's a shock. That's strange. That's very strange. So these two paradoxes are paradoxes not in the sense that they generate contradictions, but that they violate maybe our intuitions, what we naturally think is the case. And you might be wondering, like, cool, if they do this, why in the hell would we adopt this treatment of if then? If this is the results we're going to get, why are we thinking that this maps something like the English if then? And I'm going to give you two reasons. Two reasons. The first reason has to do with the very core idea of what we're doing with our language. Right? We're after constructing a formal language that's entirely truth functional. The language involves atomic sentences, truth functional connectives. And all we're interested in is tracking down the notion of validity in virtual form. And that was the thing we kind of ended with in lecture 1. And put really bluntly, if we want a truth functional treatment of if then, this is the best we're going to get. We can think about lots of the other ways we might generate a two-place function for if then. And it turns out they either are already ones we have or do not fit at all. So this is kind of the best of a bad bunch. That's the first reason. And to be honest with you, this is the real reason. But I can give you another one, and I think we talked about it. It doesn't hurt to go over it again. The other one has to do with promise keeping. So here's a promise, originally constructed by Kai von Fentel, right? It says, if I'm healthy, then I'll come to class. We might ask, when is this statement false? That is, when does one break their promise? And there's 4 cases. Right? I'm healthy, I come to class. I'm healthy, but I decide to stay home, blow off class, play FIFA. I'm not healthy, but I come to class anyway. Or I'm sick and I stay home. These exhaust the options effectively. So we can go through and think in each case by case, is the promise kept? So in our first case, right, if one's healthy and one attends class, yeah, promise definitely kept. How about in our second case? In our second case, that looks very clearly like the promise is broken. Right? The person's healthy, I'm healthy, but, I got other things to do. Now, the interesting one comes in at 3 and 4. Think about case 3. I'm not healthy, but because I'm a hero, I show up and deliver the lecture anyway. Right? Did I break my promise? Is the promise still kept? It feels like it, right? It's certainly at least not the case that you broke the promise. And the same thing can go for the last one. You do the sensible thing. You're sick, so you stay home. Again, if we put it in these terms of did you break it, it feels really hard to say that the promise is broken then. Now does this look at all familiar? It's the same damn thing. Right? Same fucking table. So if you think that there's something like when we're doing a conditional, a kind of promise, right? That is, the conditional basically says, hey, if you get the trigger condition, you are guaranteed to get the result. Then this is actually not too far off from the kind of thing we want. Again, this is a fairly heavy-handed way to understand it. It's justification for something like this, but it works. So this then gives us the truth function for the conditional. The key thing to remember is the only time the conditional is false is when the antecedent's true and the consequent is false. Yes?
So an atomic sentence does not have true functionality.
It does not.
Oh, so it's all about the.
It's all about the connectives.
Okay.
And in fact, the big trick when we get to the big tables, this is something I'm going to talk about in like 3 or 4 slides, is we're just going to simply assign truth values to atoms and then let the truth work itself out through these characteristic functions. So we might still be wondering about these paradoxes about the conditional. And a very plausible explanation is that there's something else going on in the English if-then than a purely truth functional understanding. It's a bit like what we said with and, right? And in English suggests something like order. That's why it's not purely truth functional. Well, we might say the same thing with the English if-then. It presupposes or suggests a kind of relevance between antecedent and consequent. And that's not truth functional. So that's just not going to be captured by our language, by our TFL language. And that's fine. It's just not what it's designed for. One other thing to note, and this is the only time we're going to mention here, but this will come back up again in the second half of the course. English also allows for 2 different kinds of conditional claims. Take, if Oswald didn't shoot Kennedy, then someone else did. And this is basically a sentence saying, look, given that we know Kennedy was shot, if Oswald didn't do it, somebody else had to. We don't necessarily know who, but somebody must have. This dude got shot. Right? Contrast that with this second claim. This second claim is kind of QAnon conspiracy theory stuff. It says, if Oswald hadn't shot Kennedy, somebody else would have. It presupposes Oswald did it, and then says, oh, if my dude hadn't pulled the trigger, then the Cubans would have got him. Or the CIA, or the mafia. Somebody else was there to get him, right? Do we see the difference between these two? The first one doesn't actually presuppose Oswald did it. It just says, hey, if it didn't happen this way, then something else must have. Second one says, if it hadn't been the case that Oswald shot Kennedy, already suggesting that it was, well, then someone else would have done it. This is what we often call a counterfactual conditional. Right? Were I a little bit taller, then I would have more self-confidence. We're presupposing the fact that the antecedent is false and then speculating about what would follow were it true. This is also called a subjunctive conditional. Subjunctive conditionals do not function in the same way as indicative conditionals. The usual if-then. For our purposes, we will only ever talk about indicative until the second half of the course. We'll talk about these in, I think it's lecture 10. Okay, so I just want to kind of alert you to this. We're going to come back to this point. It's going to be much more important later on, but it's worth just hearing. Sometimes, if you're reading an English conditional, you should ask yourself, oh, is this a counterfactual or is this a straightforward conditional claim? Everything we run into in the first half of the course should be one of these. But, I might make a mistake. Okay. So that's the characteristic truth tables. The truth functions that are the 5 connectives. The next step is going to be stitching these together. Yes? No, it's okay.
I'll try.
Sure.
So the truth functionality is basically a sort of for a sort of status you give to a connective
Uh-huh.
when the sentence, the complex sentence it is a part of, is its truth value is decided by the truth values of the atomic sentences.
Yes. So eventually the atomic sentences could be just the level above, right? It could be the complex sentences that make it up. But of course, to figure out the truth value for those, we need to look the next level down and the next level down. And given the way our language works, it will always bottom in the atoms.
Yes.
So yes.
It is a status you give to something.
Yes.
Okay.
And in fact, you almost perfectly re-expressed what I said in that blue box right at the very beginning.
Okay.
So we're so close, but yes. Okay, cool. So let's talk about complete tables. Again, in order to do this, we have to keep in mind those characteristic tables we just talked through. A complete truth table has a line for every possible assignment of truth and false to the relevant atoms. Each line represents a valuation. Complete table has a line for all possible different valuations. Again, each row is an assignment of truth values to some atoms, and if we get all of them, then we have all relevant valuations, without the E. Now, the size of a complete table will depend on the number of atoms we're looking at. If we have a complex sentence containing only one atomic sentence, cool, there's two. When the atom is true and when the atom is false. Right? Think of the characteristic truth table for negation. If we have two atomic sentences in the complex sentence we're looking at, well, then we're going to have 4 rows. Again, think of all of the two-place connectives we looked at, right? We have to have the one where they're both true, one where the first one's true and the second one's false, vice versa, and then finally where they're both false. If we have 3 atomic sentences, we're going to have 8 rows, because that's going to be the number of possible assignments of truth and falsity we can give to the 3 atoms. And so on and so on and so on. In fact, if a complex sentence has n different atomic sentences making it up, then its complete truth table has 2 to the n rows. Now I'm going to make a promise to you right now. I will never give you one that has more than 4 atoms as a part. At least not on the exam. I think there's one in the homework that's got 5.
Yeah, that would. Okay.
Yeah. So the important thing here is, again, what we're talking about is basically just thinking about all of the different possible ways we can assign truth or falsity to the constitutive atoms. Now, when we write up a table, we're going to have to list them all. And actually, there's an easy mechanical process for listing them. You take your complex sentence and you pull out every atom that makes it up. And you list them all over on the side. And then what we're going to do is we're going to, whatever order you've listed them in, take the one closest on the right-hand side and start off alternating between true and false. True and false. Then, if there's an atom to the left, you double it up. So you write true, true, false, false. And then if there's one again to the left, you go 4 trues, 4 falses, and so on, and so on, and so on. Right? Basically, this is a mechanical way to guarantee you get all of the combinations. It'll be easier to kind of get a grip on this once we see our first example, but this is just a handy idea in the background. So, let's go through an example. So we write down our atomic sentence. And we're going to have a column underneath each atom and each connective. Okay. The first thing we do, we take our complex sentence and we pull out all of the atoms that are involved in it. In this case, there's 3. And we write them down over here. And what we're going to do is generate a matrix. Right? This matrix is going to be all of the possible valuations, all the different possible combinations of truth and falsity we can assign to the atoms. Right? And we can fill out the matrix by first listing true, false, true, false, true, false, true, false underneath C. Like this. Right? Now this is our first step. Our second step will be to do the same under B. But instead of listing true, false, true, false, true, false, true, false, we want to list true, true, false, false, true, true, false, false. We double the sequence, like this. And then finally, for our last atom, we double again. And instead of 2 at a time, we do 4 at a time. So true, 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 false, 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 false. Like so. And what this is done is by following this procedure, we have every possible combination listed out. You don't have to do it this way. But if you do it this way, you ain't gonna miss any. This is, God willing, idiot proof. I know, because I can fucking do it. So you guys can do it too. Okay, so this is the first thing we do to build a table. You pull the atoms out, you build the matrix. Okay? The next thing we do for our table is you look at these columns underneath the relevant atoms, and you copy them. You copy them to each occurrence of the relevant atomic sentence. So we'll copy the column under A to every occurrence of A. We copy the column under B to every occurrence of B. And we copy the column under C to every occurrence of C. Okay? This is basically telling you what truth value does the atom have in this particular valuation. Yes?
Is it always that you start at the most right one?
You can go the other way if you prefer. Doesn't matter to me. It's easy if you start right to left, but you don't have to.
So you can also start with A, with T, and B.
Doesn't matter, right? Does not matter if you go left to right, right to left. If you start in the middle and wrap around, I don't care.
Why is it easier then?
So the important thing, if you do the right to left or the left to right, it's fine. It's the same process. This is just a lovely mechanical way to do it. Right? If you started off with the middle column, you might run into some problems, right? Remember, oh crap, which one did I do? Which one goes where? That's the only reason we do it this way. Not required. So, next step, we copy them over. Okay? We copy them over. And now, what we're going to do is we're going to fill in all these other columns using the characteristic tables. And we're going to fill them in, basically, going in the order that the sentence was built. So, the next step is we look, what are the connectives that are attached directly to atoms? Looking at this sentence, what are the connectives that are part of this sentence that are attached directly to atoms? The conjunction and the negation, right? We had to build those before we could build the conditional. So what this means is that the input column for the negation is the atom it's attached to. And the input column for this conjunction is going to be the 2 atoms that it is attached to. So let's go through this negation. Right? It's going to look at the input values under C. Okay? So how would we fill it out? What truth value are we going to put right there? False, right? Because remember, the characteristic table for negation says if you get a T, you output an F. And how about for our second one? T. right? If you get an F, you output a T. So you can figure out how the rest of this goes, right? Whatever value is being plugged in, you give me the opposite. Cool. Now, where do we go next? What's the next column for us to fill in? The conjunction. The conjunction. And where is the conjunction looking? What are the inputs? A and B. Right? Now with this one, remember the characteristic table for conjunction. It's only happy if both sides are happy. So if even one of these is an F, then we put an F in the middle. Cool? Again, we're using that characteristic table that we talked about earlier, the ones that told us what the functions were, to figure out how to fill this in. Nice. Nice. All right. Last one. Right? We got to fill in the conditional, which, hey, also is the main operator for the sentence. That's very cool. No, question. Conditional, it needs two inputs. Where are the inputs? What columns is it looking at? Nice, right? It's going to look at the values coming from the conjunction and the values coming from the negation. These are the ones that we pay attention to. Those are the ones that are going to tell us what letter to put in here. Yes?
So is this a demonstration of the true functionality of the connectors?
Yes. Right? Basically, the way that we're filling this in is because these connectives are truth functional. Right? The truth values of the inputs is determining the truth values that we fill in, and so on and so on and so on, all the way up till we hit the main operator. Here's the cool thing. Whatever truth value the main operator has, that's the truth value of the whole sentence. So, looking at our top one, what truth value do we fill in valuation 1? Again, we're looking at the conjunction and the negation, so what's going on there?
True.
False. So, here's the thing. That's okay. You got a 50-50 chance. The important thing is the only time a conditional is false is if the first part's true, the antecedent's true, and the consequent is false. And here we have true antecedent, false consequent. How about our second one? That's true. And our third one is true. Right? Again, the only time conditional is false, first part's true, second part's false. In fact, if we go on down, is there going to be another instance where it's false? No. In fact, the only time that this is false, that we have an F in there, is at the very top row. So we look at those two, we feed them in, shoot back. Okay. Now, what does this do? What does this whole table show? So each row is giving us an assignment of truth values to the 3 atoms, and then telling us, oh, hey, if you look under the column, under the main operator, here's what truth value this whole sentence has in this valuation. So if we make all the atoms true, our sentence is false. If we make all the atoms false, our sentence is true. And so on for every other combination. That's the beauty of these tables. It's a mechanical process. You follow it step by step by step, and it will fill in the rest. Okay, so that was our first one. Nicely done. Good job, everyone. Well done, everyone. Right. Let's do another one. So here we go. Here's another TFL sentence. And what we've done, we've written the sentence down. We have a column under every connective and every atom. And I've gone ahead and pulled out the 2 atoms. There's only 2 this time. And the first thing we need to do, having pulled them out, is we need to generate our matrix. So how do we do that? What's the first step for generating the matrix? TF underneath C. Right? And then for this one, we just double it up. And we only need 4 this time, 4 rows. So we only got 2 input atoms, which is nice. Okay. Now what's the next step? What do we do next?
Copy it into the recipe type.
Yeah, right? So we copy the column underneath B to every occurrence of B, and we copy the column under C to every occurrence of C. Boring, but important. Now the next step, we filled in all the atoms, is we have to start filling in columns of connectives attached or built directly from atoms. So where can we go to next?
Negations of the second one and the third.
Nice, right? So these 2 negations are both attached directly to atoms, so we can start filling them in. Doesn't matter which one we do first, but we can pick this one. So how will we fill in this column?
False, false, true, true.
False, false, true, true, right? So again, what does negation do? Whatever you feed in, it outputs the opposite. False, false, true, true. Where next? Yeah, the middle negation, right? Our other negation attached directly to an atom. Nice. And what will we fill in here? False, true. Again, right? Negation takes in, gives the opposite. Beautiful, beautiful. Okay, now we have some options. But what's the next step? Where's the next column to fill in?
Conjunction between C and H.
Cool. Now, question. Where are my input columns? Where am I looking? Where's our conjunction getting its input from?
The 2 negations.
The 2 negations. We want to look at this column and this column. Those are the things that the conjunction is attached to. So, looking at those inputs, how do we fill this out? What's our first one going to be? FFT, right? Because again, conjunction, hard to please. Got to have both. FFT. Cool. Okay. What's next? Is that a hand or was that it? Okay. No. What's next? Where we go next? Yeah.
Evaluating the conjunction between B and the whole second.
Nice. So this conjunction right here, right? Okay. Now where's this conjunction looking? Where's the input columns coming from?
B and the conjunction.
Yeah, right. B is one of them. And the other one is this conjunction. That's what it's attached to. That's what it's built from. Right? So we got these 2. Looking at these 2, how are we going to fill it out? How does this column look?
All false.
Oh, false, right? A lot of F's. Lots of respects being paid. Thank you for laughing at that. Okay. Now, our last one. In fact, the very last one is always the main operator of the sentence, right? So it's our negation. Where's the input for the negation coming from? Where's the column that's feeding into this? Say again?
All the rest of the...
Yeah, so everything's going to go in there, but there's always just one particular column, right? So where's the one? Yeah. The conjunction we just did, right? Again, we basically follow the order of construction for the sentence. This is why we spent so fucking long talking about that in the grammar stuff, right? The order of building tells you how to build this, how to fill in the table. So, how's it going to look? What's this column going to look like? All true. Beauty. right? How cool is that? Right? So we've done two. Very nicely done. And the general idea here, right? We take our sentence, you pull out the atoms, put them in some order, then fill out the matrix that gives you all of the relevant valuations. Yeah.
So we can say the sentence of the TFL is necessary for.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that in just a second. Cutting me off. I like it. We'll come back to it. So again, we build the matrix. Then you copy the relevant columns under the atoms. Right? Copy them over to every occurrence, and then go step by step, following the order of sentence construction. Start with the things that were built directly from atoms, then the things built from them, and so on until you hit the last column to fill in will always be the main operator of the sentence. The last column you fill in is always the main operator of the sentence. Okay. That's it. That's how these work. Right? Beauty. Now, let's talk about what good they are. What can we do with them? Talk about some semantic concepts. Now, I want to make it very clear before we talk about these. These are going to be very similar to some stuff we talked about in Lecture 1. But there's a very important word that's going to be in every one of these definitions that appeared nowhere in the concepts we talked about in Lecture 1. And this is going to be a key point. Yes?
Circling back to something we spoke about a few lectures ago, and with the if A is a sentence, then conjunction A is a sentence.
Yeah, A conjunction A.
When writing something with with negation A sentence, when writing with a conjunction, do you need to, if A is a sentence and B is a sentence, then a conjunction is a sentence, or do you need to write it down differently?
No, that's fine.
Okay.
So importantly, right, the English and the conjunction, this true functional connective, are different things. Again, one way we can see the difference is remember that the and suggests something like order.
Yeah, but it's more in the sense like when you have to, you need to just, mostly for myself, have to deconstruct it or construct it when you just go
building it. Yeah.
Or when you build down to a single
to kind of pull it
sentence,
apart. Yeah.
then you write that down in the if A is a sentence and B is a sentence, then A conjunction or A disjunction B is a sentence.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Yes.
Okay, cool. So, semantic concepts. Here's our first two. First one, a sentence of TFL is the tautology, if and only if it is true in every valuation. That is, if a sentence is true on every row of a truth table, then it's a tautology.
So the previous example is it a tautology?
Hold on, I'm gonna get to it. Everybody jumping the gun, man. I promise. Yeah, we're gonna come back to it though, right? So a tautology is a sentence true on every valuation. Meanwhile, a contradiction, a TFL sentence is a contradiction if and only if it's false on every valuation. So tautology, if it's always true, it's true in every row. Contradiction, false on every row. So these are our two definitions. Now, keep asking me. Let's cycle back. Let's look at our sentences. The one we did a second ago. Is this sentence a tautology, a contradiction, or neither? It is a tautology, right? It's a tautology because what we do, you look at the column under the main operator, and the column under the main operator. If it's a tautology, it's going to be nothing but T's. Right? So this sentence is a tautology. Now let's drop the negation for a second. Let's suppose it wasn't there, and it was just the sentence in the brackets. The sentence in the brackets, is it a tautology, a contradiction, or neither? It's a contradiction. Right? So again, the sentence in the brackets here, because we look at the column under its main operator, that's the one in the red. And that's nothing but F's. Remember my bad joke about lots of respect. Yeah. Oh, sorry. You see. Now, last question before we move on. Let's look at the one that's in these brackets. Is the sentence that's in these brackets, is it a tautology, a contradiction, or neither? Why is it neither? It's not all F's or all T's. We look at its main operator. There's some F's and some T's. All we need is one of each. All we need is one of each. If we have one of each, at least one of each, then we have neither. Okay, so again, a tautology is a sentence whose main operator has nothing but T's. It's true in every valuation. A contradiction is a sentence whose main operator is nothing but F's. It's false in every valuation. And one that is neither it's true in some valuations and it's false in others. Okay. Now to come back to your question. These are very similar to the notions of necessary truth, necessary falsehood, and contingency. But importantly, these are defined in terms of valuations. That's the magic word. Because these are all defined for our truth functional language. One way to think about it is, these are the notions of necessary truth and necessary falsehood for TFL. The important thing is, any sentence that is a tautology will be a necessary truth, but not all necessary truths will be tautologies. There are more necessary truths than there are tautologies. To be one of these is to be necessarily true in virtue of your structure alone. Your truth functional structure makes you true. Or similarly, your truth functional structure means you are always false. Okay, so these are our first two. Tautology, contradiction. Our second pair. Oh, sorry, I forgot to do this one first. Our second one, I guess, is a relationship between two sentences, and it's always going to be exactly two sentences. And we'll say that sentences A and B are tautologically equivalent, if and only if they have the same truth value on every valuation. So that is, if two sentences match on every row of their complete truth table, they're tautologically equivalent. Or put more directly, you look at the columns under their operators, their main operators. The columns have to be identical. If there's even a single valuation where the column under the main operator has a different truth value, then they are not. So this is easier to see with an example. So let's quickly go through an example. And this also shows you how we can use tables to show that some sentences are, or maybe are not, equivalent. Here's two sentences. I've already gone ahead and pulled the atoms out, generated the matrix. What are these two sentences in code? What are they symbolizations for? Do we remember? Should be ringing some alarm bells. What is this? What is this a way to character? What English expression does this symbolize? Neither nor. Yeah, right? Same thing with this. In fact, we can show that they're equivalent. So we have our matrix. Again, usual first thing, we copy over all the atoms. Okay. And then what would we do next? Where could we go next? So we start, after we've copied the atoms, you look at the next level of complexity. The connectives attach directly to atoms. We have some options here, right? We could go with these negations. We could go with this disjunction. Let's go with the negation. How would we fill out this column? False, true, right? Again, whatever input, you give these the opposite. Now, from here, again, we have some options, but we can jump to this negation. And how would we fill out this column? False, true. Now, again, options, we could jump over here, but we can go ahead and finish this off, right? So, looking at this conjunction, where are the input columns? Where is it going to get the values from? The two negations, right? Those are the ones we look for. And then if we're going with the two negations, what's the column going to look like? It's hard to please, right? So when is it true? Is it true at all? Anywhere here? Just the last one, right? False, and then true. Cool. Okay. So we did one of the two sentences. We can turn to the other one now. Okay? And we can look at our disjunction. And looking at our disjunction, how will we fill out this column? How do we fill in the column here? Yeah.
True, false, true.
Not quite.
No. I'm sorry. True, false.
Yeah. So the disjunction is the opposite of the conjunction. Disjunction, easy to please. If even one of the inputs is true, the disjunction is true. The only time a disjunction is false is if both sides are false. Now, okay, we've done that, but of course we still need to do the negation. So where's the negation looking? Where's it getting its input values from? It's okay. The disjunction, right? The disjunction. Right? And then if we're going to look at the disjunction, how are we going to fill that column out? Well, takes in the inputs, spits out the opposites, so it should be false, true. Hey! Cool, we filled out the table. Now, this table will show us whether these sentences are tautologically equivalent or not. Are they? How can we tell? What proves it?
Main logical of both.
We look at the main logical operators for the two sentences. And if we look at these columns, they are the exact same columns. And because they are the exact same columns, these sentences are tautologically equivalent. That is, they always have the same truth value, no matter the valuation. Yes?
But that has nothing to do with it must be true in every valuation.
So those are different things, right? So again, must be true in every valuation just means it's a tautology, right? Must be false in everyone, that's a contradiction. This is just a thing we're interested in about two sentences together. Yeah?
So in the case of tautologically equivalent, are the main logical operators which topic?
Yes. So the thing to look at, and the only thing we care about for evaluating this, the column under the main operators. They need to be identical. Okay, so we've done tautology contradiction. We talked about tautological equivalence. 3 more. 2 of them are going to seem kind of familiar. This one also maybe. Let's talk about the top 2 first. So our top one, we'll see that some sentences A1 through AN are jointly tautologically consistent if and only if there's some valuation that makes them all true. And similarly, we can say A1 through AN are jointly tautologically inconsistent if and only if there's no valuation that makes them all true. Do these notions look familiar? What are they basic versions of?
When some jointly consistent, when it's possible for them all to be true together.
Yeah, right? I know, it's cool. I have a very low bar for impressed. But the important thing here is that they're defined in terms of valuations. Right? So instead of wondering about this notion of possibility, we have a very explicit technical notion. If we assign truth value to atoms, is it possible to make the sentences all true? Or is it not possible to make them all true? Is there at least one row on a table we can build where the sentences come out true? Or is there no row on a table we can build where they come out all true? Yeah.
That's the next one is validity.
Gotta spoil my fun, man. Yeah. Next one is basically our version of validity. This is the big money payout. So these are our notions of consistency and inconsistency. Again, defined in terms of valuations. And our last one, I took all the way down. No, it's fine. So we'll say that some sentences A1 through AN tautologically entail sentence C if and only if there's no valuation that makes all of A1 through AN true and C false. Right? Again, this is literally the same concept, just we defined it in terms of valuation. Right? Because valuations we can make sense of. We know exactly how to capture them. We just say, these atoms are true, these atoms are false. We don't have to speculate about what kind of sense of possibility is going on. What's going to count as a legitimate possibility? Where's this coming from? We don't care. Just, here the atoms are true, here they're false. So, tautological entailment is kind of special. Yes, sorry.
I didn't understand the I didn't understand.
About entailment. Yeah. So the idea of tautological entailment is we can have some sentences that we'll take as basically premises. And we'll have a sentence we're basically going to take as a conclusion. And the tautological entailment relation will hold from the premises to the conclusion if and only if there's no row in a truth table that makes all the premises true and the conclusion false. So it's a parallel to the idea of validity. Just instead of it being impossible for all the premises to be true and the conclusion false, there's no valuation where the premises are true and the conclusion's false. That's going to be the trick. It's a technical notion that captures, in terms of valuations, the notion of validity. Yeah.
So C would be the incorporated in the sentence, or?
No, so C is going to be a sentence, right? So it could be anything. It could be any sentence you like. It might be simple. It might be complex. This isn't a sentence. This is a collection of sentences we're taking as premises, and a single sentence we'll take as a conclusion.
Oh, so basically it's just when you have a lot of truth tables and you have all written them down and worked them out, and when it turns out that the sentences you just took as premises are true and that's false, and it's not, and it's not.
Yes.
Tautologically, holy shit.
It doesn't, they do not tautologically entail. Yeah. This really trips off the tongue. Yeah. The notions here are not exactly defined in terms of, joy of pronunciation or anything. But that's a good thing. That's a handy thing because actually the fact that they're weirdly named helps to make them stick better. So we can symbolize or express tautological entailment using this. So this double turnstile. Basically, if I just say A1 through AN tautologically entails C, I can re-express it like this. Yes?
How do you do that?
You're on your own. No, it should be on the symbolization sheet on the Canvas page if you look for it. But it'll be in some of your random symbols. So, So what does this say? Again, this tells us that there's no valuation where the sentences on the left are true and the one sentence on the right is false. The thing to note is that this allows for any number of sentences on the left, right? Could be 1, could be 8 billion, right? Let's hope to God it's never that. It could even be 0. But whatever, there's always only one on the right. There's always only one sentence that is our conclusion. We don't know how many premises there might be, but there's always only one sentence at the conclusion. Now, it's worth noting this double turnstile isn't a symbol of TFL. It's something in English for us to talk about. It's a shorthand way to say that this relation holds. But it's useful because this actually expresses something we're going to talk about again later. So, the other cool thing, once we have the double turnstile, is we can express some of the other notions we've come across. So, for example, if we write this with no sentences to the left of the double turnstile, this tells us that C is a tautology. And this actually corresponds to something we talked about before. Remember I told you about the 2 ways to get validity on the cheap? And one of them was if you have a necessarily true conclusion. If this is a tautology, you can get it from nothing. Just like how a necessary truth doesn't need any premises. Which makes sense, right? Because remember, tautology is kind of our TFL surrogate for necessary truth. So this is a way to say C is a tautology. On the flip, if we write C, or any sentence you like, and then nothing at all after the double turnstile, this is a way to say that the sentence on the left is a contradiction. And that's because, well, remember the other way to get validity on the cheap. Jointly contradictory premises, right? So basically, this doesn't need anything because it could be anything at all. Now, one really cool thing is that there is a neat relationship between sentences in TFL and tautological entailment relations holding. So if you have A1 conjunction, AN, so A1 conjunction A2, conjunction A3, conjunction until AN as your antecedent, and C is your consequent of a material conditional, that is going to be a tautology if and only if there's a tautological entailment relation between A1 through AN and C. And that's because, right, again, this tells us there's no valuation where A1 through AN is true and C is false, which is the only way for that to be false. Which is cool. Okay. So again, this is just kind of telling us some cool things we can do once we have the double turnstile, a way to express things. But the big money payout, the big thing, what we're all here for. We've defined the notion of tautological entailment. Shock horror, we already spoiled it. Ruined my fun. It's okay. Is that this is going to be the way we can capture validity. If A1 through AN tautologically entails C, then the argument A1 through AN is premises, therefore C is valid. That is, if this tautological entailment relation holds, the corresponding argument is guaranteed to be valid in virtue of its form. And this is because the tautological entailment relation guarantees there's no valuation that makes the premises true and the conclusion false. Which is exactly what it means when I say it's valid. Well, that was a very weird element I said on there. So tautological entailment becomes our version of validity. This is what we look for if we're looking to see if a TFL argument is valid. We look to see, do the premises tautologically entail the conclusion? That's how we test validity in TFL. Yes?
What were the 3 examples?
Good. So this is just a way to indicate therefore. It's just another handy way to indicate the next thing coming is the conclusion. We'll also frequently do it by having a semicolon here. So it makes it very clear that those are the premises and then that's the conclusion. Yes?
To be absolutely clear, those 3 dots are meta language and not TFL.
Yes. Yes. This is all part of English. This is not part of TFL. Because remember, the only things that go into TFL are capital letters, the regular brackets, and the 5 connectives. And it ain't one of those. Yes?
So to tautologically entail means that it's true. The premises are true.
So it doesn't mean that the premises are true. All it means is that there's no valuation, no row on the table where the premises are all true and the conclusion's false. Right? So that could be because there's no valuation that makes all the premises true. Right?
So
All of the oddities we had about validity before come back, but now in terms of lines on the truth table. It's again, all it says, to go back, it just says there's no valuation that makes the A's true and the C false. Just like how validity only said it's impossible to make the premises true and the conclusion false. Don't mean the premises are actually true. Okay. This is so fucking cool, right? Because again, think about this machinery. What do you have to do? It's mechanical. It is mechanical. You pull out the atoms, you generate the matrix, copy them in, and then just follow the characteristic tables to build up your whole complete table. And then you read it off.
Is there a TFL AI?
There is. There's tons. This is something that it is so easy to train a thing to do. In fact, you don't even really need much of an AI. You can do this with light switches. Which, we're going to pass over what that means if we can't figure out how to do it. That's okay. So the reason we start with this is the beginning. This is the building block for FOL. That's the real tool. But we have to get this working first. Yes?
So theoretically, now we can determine validity without knowing the actual properties of settings.
Yep.
All right.
Yep. All we do now. So here's what you can do. Really cool. This is something you can do in your other classes if you want. Go nuts. Take an English or Dutch argument. Symbolize it into TFL, right? One sentence for each premise. Build a big table that's got all those sentences in it. And then look to see, is there any row on the table where the premises are true and the conclusion's false? If there is, that is a bad argument. That is an invalid argument. Or maybe you screwed up in the symbolization. But either way, this is why this tool is so powerful. Right? It's a sledgehammer, but damn is it a good sledgehammer. Right? And actually, honest to God, if you take nothing else from what we're going to do from now on, using this tool to help you think about how to build your own arguments is so useful. Because, again, there's difficulties about mapping the natural language sentences you want onto TFL. But if we can get good at that, and then good at thinking about how these go, how building these tables will go, you can start very easily to help yourself think about what kind of an argument looks good, or maybe better, why an argument that you've just heard is bad, regardless of whether the premises are actually true or false. That's why we start with this. This is why you're in this class. Okay. So again, we have a tool now for determining when an argument's valid. We symbolize the argument into TFL, use truth tables to determine whether the premises tautologically entail the conclusion, and if they do, the argument's valid. If they don't, then we have reason to think it is not. This also gives us a way to test whether an argument's invalid. Same process, and we look to see, is there at least one valuation, one row on the table, where premises are true and conclusions false? If there is, goodbye, bad argument. Invalid, don't have to pay attention. Okay, so we're going to skip this shortcuts and partial tables. Again, I'll upload a separate video on this. Basically, this notion here is just to say that when we're looking for things like proving a sentence isn't a tautology or isn't a contradiction, sometimes you only need one line. Michael probably will talk about this a little bit in the tutorials. No worries if you don't. I will upload a separate little video. The last thing I want to end on before we wrap up is congratulations, guys. You have done everything there is to do with TFL.
Thank you so much.
Yay! Now the real fun starts. So TFL, as we sort of said, TFL is the big first step, and it's a doozy, right? But TFL is a limited tool. The aim next, and what we're going to talk about next week, is our second formal language, first order logic. First order logic is much, much more powerful. It lets us do a lot more. But the kind of setback, the problem with it letting us do more, is it is much harder in terms of grammar. So that's what we're going to start in on next week. Take care. See you guys also.